Okay, welcome everybody to ARVC's webinar series on planning and marketing during an emergency. We are thrilled that you were able to join us today. We have a number of participants joining. I see the number going up and up and up. So I'm going to give it a couple of minutes just to let that number stabilize and make sure everyone is in before we really get started. We're at 200. We just passed 200. So, and continuing to rise. So we will just give us another minute before we get going here. All right. It seems to be slowing down. So we'll get going. Again, I want to welcome everybody to ARVC's webinar series on planning and marketing during an emergency. My name is David Basler. I am the Vice President of Membership and Marketing for ARVC. And I want to thank you for joining us during these uncertain times. We hope that this and future webinars will be helpful to you as a way not only to learn, but also to get your questions answered by our panel of experts. Today, we have a panel of three focusing on emergency planning and marketing. We're going to have a couple of presentations at the beginning. Patrick Hardy and Brian Searl will be giving those presentations. Patrick will be up first, presenting how you can successfully prepare your park for the COVID-19 virus as it is ongoing. Little intro about Patrick. Patrick is the CEO of Hytropy.com, the leading disaster management company in the RV campground industry. He is a certified emergency manager and a certified risk manager, and has had extensive experience working with properties from coast to coast in the public and private nonprofit sectors, from small business all the way up to big business. Patrick has also worked in EMS first response and consulted to the Chief of Staff for the Governor's Office of Homeland Security in Louisiana, where he's from. In the summer of 2012, he became the first small business owner ever to be selected as the National Private Sector Representative to FEMA, which is a huge honor and responsibility. He spent 3 months in Washington, D.C. helping develop a national small business framework for emergencies. Brian Searl will be presenting after Patrick, and his presentation will be on marketing your park during these uncertain times. Brian is the CEO of Insider Perks, a full-service digital agency providing best-in-class marketing and advertising services for our industry. He has worked with more than 200 campgrounds and across the country, as well as numerous investment groups, and frequently is a speaker. Actually, both of them are frequently speakers at industry events, so you may have seen them before. So with intros out of the way, I'm going to hand the mic over to Heather Rubenacher on our ARVC team to provide some quick instructions for everyone on how the Q&A portion of the webinar will work, and then we will get started. Heather?
Thank you, David. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. As we go through each presentation, if you do have a question, please use the Q&A button that you'll see at the bottom of your Zoom window. We will be addressing all Q&A questions at the end of the webinar. If you do see that somebody else is asking a question that you are also interested in, you may hit the like option, and that will float those questions higher to the top. You'll also see a raise hand and chat button at the bottom of your Zoom window, but these are disabled for the purposes of this meeting. Off to you, Patrick.
Thank you very much, Heather. I appreciate it, and thank you very much, David, for that eloquent introduction. I really appreciate it. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to be able to get into a better position in emergency response. It's interesting because considering the way that the COVID-19 response is going, things are constantly evolving. And so today, I really want to talk to you, and I want to talk to everybody about how to prepare your park successfully for the coronavirus. And one of the questions I frequently get from people is they say, well, the outbreak has already happened. Is it possible that we can still plan? And the answer is an unequivocal yes, you can do it. One of the things that I tell every one of my employees, whenever we go to one of the parks that we're working with or one that we haven't worked with for a while, is we go to the park and the first thing we do is we take a binder off the shelf. And what I tell my employees, half in jest, is I say, I want you to run your finger across the top of the binder. And I want you to do that because I want you to see the amount of dust that has accumulated on top of the plan, because that'll tell us, has the plan ever been opened? Has it ever been engaged, by the park? And so one of the things I'm going to be telling you is, and really one of the main themes that I do throughout these presentations that I deliver, is that disaster preparedness is all about empowerment. It's about empowering management, empowering employees to respond, because these are very uncertain times, and your employees, your residents, your vendors, the people who are around you are looking to you to make sure that you are in a position of leadership, that we have the tools, we have the plans, we have what we need to be successful. It's when we don't have the appropriate planning in place, or when the plans that we have in place are not empowering ourselves and not empowering staff, is when you see a lot of inefficiencies and a lot of the negative results that can come from not being prepared. So today I'm going to talk to you about how to really prepare your park. And we're going to go through three major elements, or three major planning planks. The first is your operations. And I'm going to talk to you briefly about things like crisis communication, about supplemental plans, such as how do you deal with external vendors who are coming in? How do you deal with your physical facilities? How do you deal with supplies and equipment? Those are all things that your plan has got to address. And so on an operational level, I'll begin to talk with you about some of the things that at a minimum your plan has to talk about. Then, of course, we're going to discuss human resources, and we'll spend a little bit of time on this because I'll talk to you about how to deal with sick pay. I'll talk to you a little bit about how you need to be addressing it in a meeting with employees. How do you deal with employees who may be scattered, or people who may not, if you're not going to open on time, so what do you need to discuss with them? We're going to go sort of briefly into what you need to be doing on a human resources level. And then lastly, but of course, the most important arguably is about the residents themselves, who are both either at the park room, who are maybe coming to the park because they are going to need to have their own plan. And one of the things that I will emphasize to you, and you'll hear this in just a minute, is that when we talk about the residents, you have to discuss with them that you can't do everything for them, that ultimately the empowerment is up to them. If you're going to make them successful, there's a certain amount that you can do, but ultimately they also have to be responsible for ensuring their own preparedness in the COVID response. Okay, so let's start first. And every presentation I deliver, whether I talk about hurricanes, mass shooters, tornadoes, pandemics, anything, I always start with the disaster program cycle, because one of the things I would like you to do is I would like you to take the hype out of your mind, everything you've seen on television, the doom and gloom, the Chicken Littles. I want you to take that all out of your mind. And what I want you to do is reframe it. And I want you to reframe it with this graphic in mind. The pandemic is a disaster. It is a disaster like any other. We can prepare for it. We can train our people for it. We can run drills and tests. We can respond to it, and then we need to learn from it and improve it, because that's how our plans will be better. But ultimately, this is a disaster, and you need to think about it that way. One of the things, obviously, with any disaster is you've got to have a disaster plan. So you need to make sure that, and we'll talk about your pandemic plan a little bit. Who are you going to train? How are you going to do that? We're probably not going to run drills because this thing is already out, the outbreak has already started. How do you respond? And then at the end of it, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we need to get that improved. But I want you to reframe it with this in mind, because you'll see that a lot of the chaos and a lot of the fog that's been kind of a pall over this entire thing can go away if you really think about it so systematically within the disaster program cycle. So let's begin now with planning, and we need to talk about operations, because your operations are what's going to ensure that you can continue going in business. Because one of the things that people have really woken up to, and they almost, ironically enough, they forget, is that Yes, they're running a park. Yes, they love what they do. Yes, they love the residents. Yes, they love the people who come. But ultimately, you're a business. And ultimately, your operations have to be prepared for a pandemic. So there's a number of supplemental plans that your operational pandemic plan has to address. The first, and I actually put this on the top, I've changed it because I think this is so important, is crisis communication. And a lot of times I hear from people, well, I don't know how we're supposed to address the media. I don't know how we're supposed to address, the people in my park. That's exactly what your crisis communication plan is supposed to address. It needs to talk about a few things. First, it needs to address how you're going to talk to the media, because one of the major problems that would occur at your park would be if a resident walked into an emergency room, and as a matter of fact, almost every emergency room in the United States now, at least the large ones, they all have people out there who are either reporters or they are working for the media. All the media outlets will have someone there, because the instant someone walks into an emergency room and starts coughing and saying, I think I have coronavirus, the next question they're going to ask them is, who do you work for? Where do you live? Those are all things that become important. And I will tell you that if you have a COVID positive response at your park, crisis communication is going to be the most important thing. I hear this from park owners periodically. Matter of fact, I was talking to a few of my clients last night. They were saying, well, I think a lot of this stuff is overhyped. I think that, this may not affect us. It's not going to, maybe it'll affect our opening day by a couple weeks. Well, you may think it's overhyped, but you won't think it's overhyped when someone claims to have gotten coronavirus and was just at your park. They were at your park, they were a guest, they were a vendor, and now they're sick, because that will close you. That will close your park. And you know what? You won't reopen, because you will become known as the, quote, coronavirus park. You will be known as the park that someone had coronavirus, because you know that someone's going to post that online, and then that's going to be there forever. Anytime anyone Googles you, that will be on the search at some point. How much of an effect? It's those are the kinds of things that Brian and Mark can talk about, but at least from a crisis communication level, you have to know how to handle that. You need to know how to talk to the media, and you need to lay out what you want your employees to say as well. I see this as a major error, and I see this way too often in this industry, where people say, owners who say, I've been in this business 10, 20, 30, 40 years. I know how to deal with the media. I will handle all the media requests. Well, you know what? The advent of cell phone and YouTube have now made it so that every person in the world is now an instant photojournalist. So those are things that media outlets will hire people to go and talk to your employees. So you need to have a message for them. You can't just say, don't, just put up no comment. You have to lay out what you're going to do specifically in dealing, with the media. Crisis communication also encompasses things like, how do you deal with members of the public? How are you going to deal with if public health shows up? Those are all things you have to do. Don't make your plans too top heavy. Really disperse it among everyone so that everyone has what they need to be successful. Events, obviously, you're probably not going to be having events at your park for a while. And if you do, they would be very small. And in fact, if they probably would not begin until after the season began, after Memorial Day, if at all, for a while. If they do, regardless if let's say in a month the government says, you know what, the national emergency is over, we still want people to be careful. If you are hosting events on your property, do you still have to have a pandemic plan? Yes, you do, because emotions are going to be high this summer. They are going to be high in the fall because a lot of events have been canceled. And especially if it really becomes a patchwork where some parks are holding events, some parks are not holding events, you need to have a plan in place for what do you do if the pandemic is at a position where you want to keep the park open, but that people are going to be in very close contact. You have to make sure that you're upholding, social distancing. You can't just have a large crowd of people. That is not a good look, and that will embarrass your park, especially if it is discovered that people are getting sick. Supplies and equipment. There's a few things that are unique to the pandemic that you really need to think about. And it's more than just saying, well, I have enough soap, for people to wash their hands, all that. It's more than that. One of the things that we are discovering is that the residents and the staff They will go into your restrooms and they will take toilet paper. They will take paper towels. They will take hand wipes. They will take hand sanitizer. That stuff almost has it has a sort of incredible street value, perhaps. I mean, it's really incredible that people are taking all that stuff. Do you need to know how to secure your supplies? Yes. Do you need to have counts of the number of hand sanitizers you have on property? Yes. Do you have to do that on a daily basis? Yes. Do you have to have inventory controls? Yes. Do you have to make sure that equipment is disinfected? Yes. And you can't just say, hey, disinfect this, disinfect that. You need to really be clear on how to do that. You need to walk people through it. If you have packages that are incoming, you have to have something in place to prevent cross-contamination. If a box comes onto your property, you need to have a place where someone is taking the object out, moving the box over, disinfecting the object before it gets placed into inventory in your stores. If you have things coming in all the time, those are things you have to be putting in place. Because even if you don't, if people see that there are boxes everywhere, people are getting very nervous, and that is a bad perception issue. Your plan has to address those things. Some of you have environmental cleaning. I was working with one of the larger conglomerates just a few days ago, and they were telling us that they are actually hiring an environmental cleaning company. And you know what? I actually told them this. I said, look, when the environmental cleaning company comes in after hours to clean your park, this is what I want you to do. Instruct them to park the van directly in front of the office where everybody can see it. Make sure that every single person can see the side of the van and see that it is actually a cleaning company, so that they know that you are taking steps and you are being very, very active. Simply saying, well, we wash our hands throughout the day, that's not enough. Simply saying, well, we have posters, that's not enough. You have to be very clear and open, saying, we recognize this is an unusual situation. This isn't just, quote unquote, any flu season. This is something we're taking very seriously. And therefore, we as park owners, because you live here, we take that really seriously, that this is your home. And so we are going to take additional steps to ensure we are protecting you like this entire place is your home. The other elements on operations. And so I'm going to move away from emergency response for a minute, and I'm going to talk about recovery. And I have been doing disaster preparedness for 15 years. My father was a disaster planner for the Cal State University system for 30 years. In all the time I've been a disaster planner, I have yet in my entire career to ever see an effective business continuity and recovery plan. And one of the things that is absolutely fascinating about this pandemic is the fact that so many people simply do not know how to recover their parks. And you have to have an element of recovery. You have to put something in place to ensure that people know how you're going to recover the facilities. How are you going to get back in business? Because if you go out of business, people can't live there anymore. You need to know what you're going to do on a recovery level. How are you going to get your park reopened? And I'm sure that Brian and Mark are going to talk about this a little bit, which is the part of the physical recovery is marketing, saying, yes, we are back in business. Yes, we are doing everything we can to get back in place. This is a safe place to live. This is a wonderful place to go to during your season. These are places where you want to be. The other element, too, is recovery on information technology. How many of you use technology at your park? I mean, you have to use IT at virtually at some level. As a matter of fact, I was kind of laughing because I work with a park in the middle of, they're just outside of a place called Waukesha, and they're the only park I've ever seen that they do everything in pen and pencil. Everything is done in pen and pencil, everything that they do, their entire operations. Other than them, people use computers on some level. One of the things that we are discovering, I don't know how many of you saw this in the news, but the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services got a massive denial of service attack because people were doing COVID scams. They were doing coronavirus scams, and they are trying to trick you in the confusion to get into your database. So those are things you have to talk about. Do you have to deal with how to recover your information technology? The answer is an unequivocal yes. Again, remember, this is a disaster like any other. Treat it as if it will impact every part of what you do and you will be successfully prepared. So make sure you're thinking about your staff, the residents, and the property when you're developing these operational plans. So now let's talk a little bit about human resources, because obviously management is going to be huge. Again, this is like any disaster. I tell every property I work with, the first thing you need to do is you need to delineate alternative leadership. Again, I see this way too often, especially from really well-run properties. Ironically enough, the more well-run the property is and the better the owners are, the more often I see them falling into this pitfall, which is they say, I know how to run my park. I have been doing this since before you were born, Patrick. I know how to do this. And I say, that's great. What happens if you're sick? What happens if you have a bereavement? What if you are a part of the vulnerable population and you have to shelter in place and you can't go to the park or you have to be in your home? What are you going to do then? Do you have a delineated responsibility? The answer is an unequivocal yes. You have to have other responsibilities. You have to delineate responsibilities to other employees so that they know what their leadership abilities are and what they can do. You also have to have the recovery of the management functions. What do you authorize them to do if you are not available? What happens if you get sick? This is more commonly known as a succession plan. So those are things that you need to be putting into place. Okay, do you need to hold a meeting with staff? Absolutely, positively, yes, you must. If you have an owner who, let's say they own 5 or 6 or 7 properties and they don't come to your property at all, and you decide that you're going to have a staff meeting with everyone to go over some elements of your plan, does the owner need to be there? Yes, they do. But what if they live out of state? Then they need to call in. You need to put them on speakerphone so that everybody can hear their voice, so that when you talk about the steps you are taking, they realize that there is absolute management backing for everything that they are saying. So what kind of things are going to need to be discussed during the meeting? The first, you need to talk about how you're going to handle if people become ill, if either a staff member becomes ill, if one of their family members becomes ill, or if management becomes ill. In other words, you need to prepare for a potential COVID positive response. Because of time limits today, we don't have time to talk about it. But you do have to go into what you are going to do if you do have a COVID positive response dealing with illnesses, because that is going to have a massive effect on morale. That is going to have an effect on your operations. Secondly is psychological. One of the things that I know this happens a lot at parks is that people start up the rumor mill. They start talking about things. Staff members, sometimes because they're really chummy with people in the park, they tend to perpetuate that. You need to be clear with people. We recognize this is a time of great agitation. We understand there's anxiety and nervousness, and we are here to help you. And you need to provide psychological support. Does that mean that you have to have an on-site psychiatrist? No, but you do have to provide psychological support. Again, we don't have time to go into every element of that, but that is something you need to discuss. No matter what, you should, when you first stand up and talk to your staff, the first thing you need to say with them is this, and don't deviate from this. Don't skip over this. First thing you say is, your health and your family's health is our highest priority. After that is the health and safety of the residents. After that is everything else, so that people understand that they're not pawns in some game, because people are extremely nervous. As a matter of fact, I've been doing this for a very long time. This is the very first time I've ever seen the hype and the agitation nationally that I am now. And I was there during Hurricane Katrina. This is about as high as I've ever seen it. So do you need to talk about the effect on benefits? Absolutely. If people if you're not going to have people working, if people are going to be going home, how is it going to impact the number of hours they're working and the benefits? However that works, you need to talk about that. Do you need to talk about sick days? Yes. Do they have to work sick days? Are you going to give them additional sick days? There are some states, and I'm not an attorney, so I'm not keeping up with every single state's laws, but like in California, for example, the state is mandating additional sick days. In other words, you have to offer additional sick days. You don't have a choice. Payroll. This is huge. People are going to ask, are you still going to pay me? Because some people are living paycheck to paycheck. That's the reality of our world. Do you need to tell them, are they still going to get paid? Are the benefits going to be paid out? All those things. And then the last thing you need to talk about is sending people home. You need to have a written policy. Do not, please, do not do it verbally. Don't do it extemporaneously. Don't simply say, well, hey guys, you know, if you're not feeling well, we're going to send you home. No, you need to lay out a written policy that people can read that says, if you have, and I actually have, it's interesting because actually the plans I write, and if any of you are interested, I'll actually give you the exact wording that we tell people to read word for word, because it comes from the CDC's website. So anyone who asks for that, I'm happy to provide that to you. Literally says, if you have a temperature of this amount, if you are coughing like this, if you are sneezing, we are sending you home. And that is clear as black and white so that everybody understands that you're not fooling around. Couple of other things is let's talk briefly about training, and then we'll lastly go into the residents, and then we'll wrap it up. Participation. Do you need to train everybody on this plan? Yes, you do. You need to put everybody in the room, as I said, and you need to go over everything. And please don't do it in between other meetings. Don't do it when you have other conference calls. Don't do it when you have other things happening, because you need to spend the time. And one of the things that I do, and as a matter of fact, I do this as a CEO in my companies, is I turn to my employees and say, listen, after the meeting is over, I will stay as long as necessary, and I tell my VPs the same thing. We stay as long as necessary until everyone's concerns are abated, period. Period, full stop. So you stay as long as you need. Who needs to be trained? Senior management, of course. The middle management, I know that obviously that's going to be a little different, but if you work in a conglomerate, your regional managers do need to come. Do they need to be at all 50 meetings? If you have 50 parks in a particular state, do they have to come to all of them? Yes, they do. Do they need to be on the phone? Yes, they do. There is no question. They must be on all the calls. And then of every employee you have, period. When I say line employees, I mean the reception staff, I mean 100%. Everybody's got to be on there. Okay, so let's, this is one of the last slides here, so I'm going to go ahead and talk to you about the residents. The residents are going to ask you things. Can you provide me plans? Can you do this? Can you do that? Please do not promise the world. Please do not provide a magic wand. You cannot do everything for everybody. I know it's tempting. Trust me, it's very tempting to say you're going to do everything, but you can't do it. One of the first things you need to tell them is they need a shelter in place. So especially if they are a vulnerable resident, either because they're geriatric, or maybe because they even have a newborn, or maybe because they have some kind of immunocompromise. I know it's so interesting because I know I've been to properties all the time where they actually know the medical histories of a lot of the residents there. They know who's sick. They know who can't come out of their home. Do you need to discuss that with the residents? Yes, absolutely, because you have to make sure that that's all taken care of. So second thing is making sure that people have personal plans. You need to tell them, please have your own personal plans in place. We can't write that for you. There are places where you can do it. For example, in our mobile app, you actually can create a disaster plan for COVID, specifically in our app. We're the only ones that have it. Can they create one directly in the app? Yeah, yes, they can. You can talk about how you're going to recover. Because the one other question that they're going to ask you, I want to make sure that what you are discussing is making sure that people understand if you're going to recover, how are you going to do it and when? The last thing is the timeline of implementation. We do not know, and I don't care what anyone says on TV. I don't care what Justin Bieber says. I don't care what the Kardashians tell you. I don't care what people are seeing, what Anderson Cooper says, whatever. The answer is we do not know whether this is a one-time event or if this is going to be a longer-term COVID seasonal kind of response. So do you need to have implementation steps? Yes. You need to discuss what you're going to have to be doing in the next 6 months. Do your plans need to reflect that? Yes, they do. Do your plans need to talk about what you're going to be doing over the next 12 months? Yes, you absolutely have to do that. Do you have to discuss what you're going to be doing over the next 12 to 18 months? Yes, you absolutely have to do that. And the reason why that is red is because we will know in the next 18 months whether this will be seasonal or whether this is a one-time pandemic. We will also know if there's going to be a rapid vaccine. It's going to take that long. Epidemiologists, as of this point, and I monitor the CDC site every day, and they actually have a daily blog on there. Is they don't know. We just do not know yet. There's a lot of things we do not know, so things will evolve. And then I'm just going to talk to you kind of frankly as a business owner, is that one of the things that I really want you to stay away from, and I'm a dramatic guy myself, I love all that stuff, but one of the things you've got to do is when you're dealing with employees, you've got to have what's called a no rumor policy. No rumors. The only thing they should be talking about are things that either you tell them because you've got it from CDC or things you're working with, but do not allow employees to spread rumors. The other thing, which I apologize, I forgot to mention earlier, is you need to have a policy with employees about taking supplies. If an employee takes a hand sanitizer, you need to have a policy against that. You need to have a policy that says, and frankly, the way that we're telling, we're actually dealing with this, we're doing a lot of hair salons, and what's happening is that clients at the hair salons are showing up because salons have to have hand sanitizer in place. They're going to the salons and they're literally stealing the hand sanitizers off the stations when they're coming back from a shampoo, because while their stylist is taking off their gloves, they're literally stealing the hand sanitizers. So one of the things you've got to have in place is you need to know and say to employees, this stuff, we have a policy on theft. If you steal things, you're going to be in trouble. Either you're going to get sanctioned, you're going to, whatever, because you do not want people doing that, and make sure people are absolutely serious about your expectations. You also, oddly enough, does your disaster plan need to talk about what you're going to be doing down the road? Yeah. Do you have to do that right now? No, of course not. But for right now, you do need to really be planning on what you're going to do. What happens if your season is delayed? We were talking with BLM. BLM is suspending some permits of some parks because there is concerns because they don't want events being held. Do you need to have policies on common buildings? Yes. Do you need to have a policy on pools? Yes, you do. You need to have a policy on dealing with all that. I can't really talk about it. We don't have enough time to really discuss it. But those are things that you've got to cover. Your pandemic plan has got to cover all these things. I know it sounds like a lot, but you do need to think about these things over time. If your plan doesn't address them, that's going to be an issue. I have a saying I tell every business owner: either you control the disaster or the disaster controls you. That's the choice that you make. Because we see the pandemic as a disaster, you have to make the choice for yourself, whether or not you're going to be prepared for the disaster or whether the disaster is simply going to overtake you, because we just don't know enough right now on the season. So, are things changing on a daily basis? Absolutely. So just kind of as the last thing here, and then I'll begin to surrender the floor to Brian, who will talk about the marketing elements of it, which I think is going to be, really interesting. Is I want you to realize that this disaster is just like any other emergency in the sentence that this is an opportunity for you. I want you to see this as an opportunity, right? Because if you see it as an opportunity to be better, you're going to put yourself in a position not only to recover, but to be actually more successful. I actually lived in China. For those of you who know me, I speak Mandarin Chinese, and the word for crisis is actually a couple of different Chinese symbols, and one of them is the Chinese symbol for opportunity. So it's actually an opportunity for you to become more successful. So if you're willing to put yourself in that position where you're not being caught flat-footed, you're not being caught in a place where you're not going to be able to move your park forward or make it worse, then you're going to be in a place where you will be able to survive in the long run. I know we're not going to be taking questions right now, but one of the things I wanted to mention to you is a free resource for you. On Monday morning, we will have a free COVID-19 plan for RV parks. We have a mobile app that's called Disaster Hawk, and it's actually, as I said, this is not something we're selling. It's totally free, and everything I talked about today will be in the app, and you can actually customize your plan directly in the app for yourselves, for your parks. And as a matter of fact, in the app, in the answers, you will have a staff-facing plan as well as a plan that is specifically that can be seen by the residents. So if they actually pull up the app, there will actually be a place in there for them to be able to look directly at the public part of the plan. So as I said, that will go live on Monday morning. And in the meantime, I'm happy to be, we're actually a partner with ARVC, so I'm happy to assist you all in any way we can. It's our job as disaster planners to be there for you. So if there's any additional way that I can support or assist anyone on this call, please let me know, and I'm more than happy to act as a resource. So at this time, I will now surrender the floor back to either David or Heather, and I will be on, and I will, of course, be here during the question time. So when you look at Brian and Mark's presentation, remember, keep in mind, this is your chance to develop your park, and not only to survive, but actually to thrive as well. Thank you all very much.
All right, thank you, Patrick. What a great presentation and some valuable information for our industry. We have a lot of questions coming in, which we will be addressing shortly. And I do want to let everyone know that the app that Patrick mentioned a minute ago will be linked from our blog, which is you will find the link to it in the Q&A window that is where you're typing in your questions. There's a answered section, and we've linked that a couple of different times already today. We'll also be sending that link out after the webinar as well. And I also want to remind everyone that if you're having any technical difficulties, these webinars will be recorded and will also be on that blog as well for you to listen to later as well. So we are tracking all of your questions. They're great questions, and we're going to get to those after Brian Searl's presentation. So I'm going to give the floor over to Brian now.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Patrick. I don't have a presentation or a slideshow to share like Patrick did, so I'm just going to go ahead and kind of go through the steps and things that we've been hearing from some of the owners that we worked with, and then obviously we're going to open up to questions. Mark will join in. He's got a lot of experience working with a lot of parks, and he has a lot of valuable insight to add as well. So I think the first piece that I want to emphasize here is that you must be paying attention to your Facebook and social media accounts. Especially Google My Business. We all know from a small business owner standpoint, a campground owner standpoint, that there are some owners who have pushed back against social media in the past, but this is where people are talking about this virus. This is where they're communicating. And if you're not paying attention to the posts and the things that people are saying, then you could potentially be opening yourself up to misinformation being spread about your park. And it's different when they're talking about clean restrooms or a bad experience with a staff member perhaps yelling at them. When you come down to something as serious as a virus, it becomes even more critical to pay attention to that. Same thing with Google My Business. A lot of people don't think of Google as a social network, but there is a Q&A section on Google My Business along with reviews that anyone can ask a question on and anyone can answer a question on too. And those are super important for you to be paying attention to so misinformation does not get out there. You must know what's being said, by whom, by when, and you must respond as quickly as you possibly can. Everything that you do, as Patrick Hardy mentioned, stays online forever. And so how you act and how you engage and how you handle this situation is going to be available for people long after this is gone in a distant memory, hopefully. So the most important thing is for you to get ahead of misinformation. Be transparent with your guests and overshare. This is not the time to hide. This is not the time to second guess whether it's something that's critical to share, I can hold off for later, or maybe I can put a good marketing spin on it. Just be transparent and show people you care. So share your basic statements. This is what I've been working on a lot for some of our clients over the last few days, is putting basic statements on the website. What is COVID? How are we responding? What are our policies? But the beginning is just sharing the basic CDC information so that people know that you're open and that this is what they can expect at your park. Pin that to the top of your website. Create a dedicated page. But make sure it's on the front page of your site. Make sure it's on your social media. Make sure it's on your Google My Business. Make sure it's provided to your employees so they can communicate it over the phone. But be consistent with it and have that basic statement ready. And then going beyond that, as far as social media goes, detail your cleaning procedures for your cabins and facilities. We all know that the RV industry has a leg up because we're in our own rigs a lot of the times, and we're staying away from other people, 6 feet, 30 feet between sites, those kinds of things. And so there is an advantage to our industry. But many of you have cabins, many of you have yurts and teepees and rental units and things like that. So detail how you're cleaning these. What are you changing? What are you doing to adapt? Is there hand sanitizer in the cabins? Those kinds of things. Same thing with your facilities. Are you changing the way your staff cleans the bathrooms, the stores? All that. And so Patrick talked a little bit about that, but this is important information for you to share with the public too, because how you phrase it and how you word it actually can help shape the perception of your park and whether it's safe to go there in the minds of the consumers. So talk about your amenities and activities too. Are there amenities that are changing? Are you putting in new places to clean your playgrounds, things like that? Are you holding your regular activities? Are you limiting them or changing them in any way, shape, or form? Is the park closed or open different hours? What are you doing to limit interaction with your guests? And so there are things that we'll talk about in a second as far as technology goes. I've been talking to a couple different people about how those things might help. Changes to your cancellation or refund policies. We've been working with some owners on this. Be flexible. Put yourself in your guests' shoes. None of us want to be in the position where we're having all these cancellations, even though some parks are obviously filling them right back up again. I've seen posts from people in Florida and other places that are, as soon as cancellation goes out, they're filling it right back up. That might continue, but it might not. And so be prepared to have that policy in place where you can be flexible with people and say, if they're calling for a cancellation, well, maybe you can change your dates, or maybe you don't have to cancel right now because I'm willing to, instead of saying 30 days non-refundable, do 14 days or 7 days. So just be adaptable and be empathetic to their situation. What are your procedures for updating your guests? All these things can be shared on multiple different channels. Everything is marketing. How your employees talk on the phone, how you answer emails, whether you do live chat, what you're posting on Facebook. All of that is marketing. And so by creating these procedures that Patrick was talking about too, for updating your guests, how are we going to communicate? If things change, where can you find the information that's the latest and the most up to date? If you're familiar with a Facebook page, there's ways where you can pin a statement or a post to the top of your page. So it's the first thing that everyone sees when they go there. So make sure that this is more of your generic statement, kind of the one you would post on your website of what's being done for COVID and things like that at your park, and providing the information that the CDC is giving as far as how it's transmitted or how it can be cleaned or killed or whatever is the latest available out there. Date your posts on Facebook. I know they're already dated, but very few people read those tiny texts as far as the time and date that's posted. And when you're looking at a situation on Facebook, as far as your news feed goes, it's very easy for somebody to see a post that's 3, 6, 7 days old. The information with this is changing so fast and so rapidly. Don't be afraid to just, in the text of your post, write Saturday, March 19th or whatever the date is. This is when it was posted. That way, if someone sees that and it's 2 days old and things have changed rapidly at your park, or in the situation of the virus at all, that they're not having any misunderstanding that this is 2 days old information or 3 days old information and they need to go get a more up-to-date source. So date the posts so they don't misinterpret old things. Share your photos of your cleaning staff, your hand sanitizer stations, your other healthy options. Focus on, again, we talked about being transparent with guests, but that doesn't, you can also be personal. Share the photo of Sally who cleans your restrooms and show her actually cleaning. It makes people feel safer. It makes people feel more calm when you do these things. Your tone of voice in your posting, how you present it, how you come across is actually going to be mirrored by other people who talk about this as well. And so the more calm you are, the more calm your guests are going to be as well. And that goes not only on social, but with the tone of voice that your staff are presenting and the confidence that they're exuding on the phone as they discuss these different things. All of this is great, but you still want to make sure too you're mixing it in with regular posting, because we're not closed. We're open for business. We all know RV parks are safer options than hotels because they're more spread out. And so make sure that you're mixing in regular posting here. Don't stop the marketing that you're already doing. Show campers that are having fun. Show guests that are out enjoying your park, because again, it's going to be a tool that you can use to help people be calm and understand that camping still is a safe option for them to enjoy. Verify all the information before you're sharing. Your guests are depending on you. You're a business owner. You're a resource for them. You're a more trusted authority in many cases. And so verify all the information that you are sharing. It's very easy to hit share on a Facebook post. We've all done it before and then realize that something is maybe not correct or something is not exactly what you wanted to share. So verify all that stuff because your guests are depending on you. I would appoint one person at your park, even if it's you, the owner, but someone who's in charge of your messaging, and be consistent, because the last thing you want to do is have someone answer an email one way and then talk to somebody different on chat, or answer the phone differently, or post a different statement on Facebook. And then people get mixed and they get confused, and that just leads to people not being happy with your response. Keep that same message everywhere: social, web, email, phone, chat. Have policies written out for your staff. Patrick touched on this too. But again, this goes back to marketing is everything that you're doing, talking on email, phone, all that kind of stuff. And so if you have to update a printout daily that you have at the front desk that people can read and understand, here's what's closed in the area, here's what's opened in the area, here are the local attractions that you can see and you can't see. And if the majority of things are closed in your area, then find activities that are free, like hiking trails and things like that, that people can enjoy. So focus on that. Don't stop your regular marketing efforts. We talked about this briefly, but this is going to be over. This is not going to last forever, most likely. And so focus on continuing what you're already doing. If you're running Google Ads, for example, for campgrounds near your city, continue to do that. I've talked to so many parks who are, yes, getting cancellations, but are also filling those sites up too, right on the back end of it. And so if you overreact and get into a situation where you think I'm losing money and so I have to cut my expenses, consider what expenses you're cutting, because marketing can help drive people on the back end of that during the crisis, as well as when it's all over, helping get those guests back to your park, like Patrick said, talking about how you're a safe environment again. We're back open if we had to close, or our facilities are back to normal, or our activities are back to normal, and those kinds of things. Provide answers to your questions in advance. Customer service here. Think about what you would want. So add a page on your website focused on coronavirus that has frequently asked questions on it. Some of the things we already covered, right? How do I clean my cabins? How am I doing this? Why is it safe to do this? Are my events still open? Because again, that's going to save you time too. I've talked to a number of parks who are just being overwhelmed with phone calls and questions and people panicking and not being unsure of whether they should cancel or not. So adding those frequently asked questions to your website helps provide more of a calming, straightforward answer, and maybe will help you cut down on those call volumes. Same thing with social media. Create short videos that answer questions. It's rarely easy to take the camera on your phone and point it at your face or point it at an employee's face and do a quick 30-second video that says, hey, we're here at the park and we're open for business, that kind of stuff. Make sure you're reinforcing that to people over and over again. Yes, we're open. Yes, we're here. Yes, it's safe. All that. We talked about in the beginning, Google questions and answers. And this is something that is very, very visible on your Google listing when people are searching for the name of your park. You can actually use this as your own personal frequently asked questions section. Anyone can answer and anyone can post a question, which means you as the owner can ask a question and then go right behind yourself and answer it. So if there's things that you feel are important to share, maybe about general marketing too, but also about the coronavirus, how am I handling things, all that, it just helps provide one more avenue of ways that people can get answers about these things from your park. Share local resources. We talked about what's open, what's closed, those kinds of things, but all of this is hyper local. San Francisco's doing one thing, New York's doing another, Nevada's doing one thing, Utah's doing another. And so make sure that you're providing the information that people need too, that's up to date and focused on your area, because federal applies to certain areas and states apply to different areas and cities apply to different areas, and on and on and on it trickles down. So being that voice of authority also makes you a more trusted resource as well from a marketing perspective. And then monitor everything. You have to pay attention to this stuff. Have a plan for review responses. What if someone says they felt unsafe because they saw something an employee was doing in the store that made them uncomfortable? I mean, it could be something as simple as an employee sneezed on your clothes racks by accident, and this guy got super offended and went and wrote a review. Well, if you're not paying attention to that, or you don't want to answer that, or you don't know that it's out there, then who knows how other people can interpret these things? What if somebody didn't agree with you holding events? Maybe you're limiting it to under 50 or under 10, but maybe they still got upset because you were holding an event, period, and had 9 kids gathered together doing a scavenger hunt. So have a plan to answer these things, because it's all marketing and it's all focusing on making sure that people are calm and they understand what's going on. Patrick touched on having a plan for media calls. Same messaging as everywhere else. Keep it brief. The less you share, the lesser chances there are, I guess, for the media to misinterpret things. And so make sure you keep it brief, but have a plan for those, because they very well could come. As far as saving time goes, I mean, that's really all I have about marketing, but as far as saving time goes, some of the things we were talking about is if you have menus on your phone, press 1, press 2, have a press 1 for our policy on coronavirus. And so they can listen to a recording, and then maybe that helps you save time from your staff and lets more people get through on the phone. We talked about the page on your website. Use technology, embrace it. Things like live chat can help you dramatically reduce the call volume. You can handle multiple chats at one time, whereas everybody can only talk on the phone to one person at the same time. Use things like apps to request firewood, to text message back and forth with people. Use remote check-in features. So I know just one example that I've talked to this morning that CampSpot is working on this, and I know I'm sure others are as well. But they're creating a way to check in remotely and avoid check-in lines at reservation offices. And so these are all things and ways that you can embrace technology to kind of help this stuff go forward. So overall, from a marketing standpoint, it's just, again, to hit on the highlights, you have to use it, you have to pay attention to it, and overshare. Because the more you share and the more you're transparent, the more guests see that you care about them and their families, and that they can see that camping is a very safe experience. So I'll turn it back over to David. That's all I got.
All right, thank you, Brian. Before we get to the Q&A portion of our session, I want to let everyone know that ARVC has partnered with Brian and Insider Perks to provide everyone on this webinar with a free reputation management and social monitoring tool. Brian spoke about the importance of tracking comments and questions online. And these tools that we will be offering are great for you to ensure that you're able to track these comments about your park, avoid any miscommunication about your park online, provide communication with guests and potential guests. And we will be, along with the link to the app that Patrick mentioned, we will be posting this on our blog as well. And that's the link that I mentioned earlier, but we will also be sending that out to everyone. One question that came in, Brian, real quick before we dive in is, will we be able to get a one-page summary of your presentation that we can post on our blog as well? I'm assuming the answer is yes, correct?
Yes, absolutely. I'll put something together for you.
We will post that on our blog as well then. So the first question I want to lead off with before we open it up is to Patrick. We've had a lot of people asking questions about how to keep things clean, especially bathrooms, with owners not being and operators not being able to, the question specifically was, we can't be expected to go into bathrooms after each camper. How do we keep things quote unquote clean? And then the sub question to that is, if the campers have running water in their rigs, do the campgrounds have the ability, the option to close the bathhouses?
Hey, David, this is Mark.
Patrick, do you have sound? Can you hear me? You might be muted. Oh, there he is.
Okay, I think I was muted there. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. We're dealing with public bathrooms. Parks go in one of two directions. First is they close them. And that really right now is what most are doing, because we don't know to the extent to which the virus can live on surfaces. We're not completely sure yet. So that's one of the things that's become a big deal. And obviously you can't be constantly going after every single person who uses the restroom. But one of the things we say is that if you're going to keep it open, you do need to have a heightened schedule of when people go in and clean it. So, and you need to make that very visible so that people can see that. They do this a lot in restaurants. As a matter of fact, one of the things I was telling some of my restaurant colleagues I do these plans for is I was saying, you know, that schedule that nobody ever really looks at on the wall? And they said, yeah. And I said, I want you to create another one, but I want you to double the size of that piece of paper, and I want you to double the size of the font, so that everybody is very clear, so that anyone who uses that restroom knows that you have been in there and that you have been just doing a basic cleaning. Does it mean you have to scrub the whole place down? No, of course not. You don't have the time or the ability. However, you do need to have a schedule so that people are going in and out of there on a regular basis. Because what it also is it's psychological, and people will see that you have included additional medical surveillance of the way the property is operating, because that's obviously a very common area. And if people go in there, especially if someone's going in there with a mask and gloves and cleaning, and that's really visible, again, it's a perception issue as well as an actual disinfection issue. So I'm sorry, David, so what was the other question that you were asking me? I apologize. What was the other part of it?
For parks where the campers have their own bathrooms within either their rig or a cabin or a park model, can they close the public bathhouse? And then I guess on the flip side of that is, if a campground relies on their bathhouse and can't keep it clean due to not having proper staff or whatever it might be, does that mean that they need to close their park at that point?
Well, if that's required to operate, and as I said, I always couch my words very carefully on that, so I apologize about that. But the answer is that if you can't operate with that, then yes, you have to close. Because right now, if you can't monitor it, it creates a public health problem for obvious reasons, and that's why the CDC has really recommended to people that if there are places where those kinds of things are uncontrolled, then you need to err on the side of caution. So you need to err on the side of closing them, so that you don't run into an issue later on where it was like, you know, we didn't have the guidance, and therefore, you know, we didn't know, and then you end up having an infection, and then people are going to come back and ask you, well, why didn't you close it? That seems obvious. So, but I will say this as a general, just as a general conclusion here, which is, you need to conduct the risk assessment of the property. So you need to see whether or not how well you can control it. What some places have done before is they set up a really strict schedule where it's like one person goes in at a time. If you can't enforce that, then you probably can't keep that open. I know it sounds dramatic, and that may seem like it's a really alarmist, but because information is still coming in, you need to follow whatever the regulations say. But luckily, one of the things that has happened is that county public health departments have come out with really specific guidance on these things. So what I would recommend to everybody is do this before you make any decisions. Go to your county public health department's website and look and see what guidance they have given you. That will tell you a lot, because they go directly to the state, and state goes directly to CDC. And they say, what should we do in regards to X? And they will provide you with that guidance. If not, the thing I would recommend is call them and ask them. Call and ask, because it's important enough. And one of the things that I will do is I will actually call also to see what kind of generalized guidance is occurring. So for those of you who come on Monday, I will actually have some answers for you from what public health departments are generally saying. So I'll make an interrogatory to a lot of the counties that we work with, and I'll just kind of get some basic, also so I can give you kind of the bandwidth of answers that we are hearing as well. That's it for me on that.
Okay, we're also getting some questions, Patrick, about other amenities, playgrounds, pools, those kinds of things. I'm assuming that the answer would be similar, correct? If you can't keep it clean to CDC standards, you should close it off?
For right now, we will recommend closure. You need to close your playgrounds. You need to close your pools, period. No ifs, ands, or buts about that stuff. The reason why that's important is because that isn't even a cleaning issue. The issue there is social distancing, which is one of the things that is appropriate. Children, because of their nature, don't follow the regulations. If we say to them, you need to keep, a foot and a half away, a yard and a half away from your friends, they're not going to do that, right? Because kids are kids, and kids are clearly touching things, they're interacting. So the guidance on this is very specific. It is very clear. No playgrounds, no pools until further notice.
So it's especially with pools, even with the chlorine in the water, it's really less a cleanliness and more a social distancing issue, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah, because one of the things that I found when I went to parks all the time is pools tend to be great congregating areas, right? And this is especially true when parents are tired of using the electronic babysitter. Their kids are getting stir crazy. The kids want to go out. They have a lot of energy, and they're running around together. There are kids that are touching one another. They're in the pool, together. That's a clear public health issue. And because of that, as I said, states are very clear on this. There is no ambiguities that those places have to be closed, not because of the contamination issue. It's because of the cross transmission issues between kids and between adults who may be talking and congregating, because people forget that, you're going to be in very close quarters. That's why gyms are now closed, for that very reason. It's not because of the machines, it's because of how close in proximity people are in those places. So yes, absolutely.
All right. Another question on a different subject. If there is a COVID-19 case with an employee, would that cause a quarantine on all persons that had any contact with that person, which in this case would be all of their employees?
Yes, it would. And not only that, anyone they may have interacted with, because the first thing that the epidemiologists are going to ask you is you need to tell me every person you've interacted with in the last 48 hours. And that's going to be a problem, because they may say, I've interacted with a resident, I've interacted with these people, and they're going to ask you, are the residents, are these vulnerable populations? What's going on? And so that's going to create an immediate problem for everyone, because you're going to have to quarantine all your employees, and public health will give you direction. One thing that your pandemic plan does have to have is what do you do if you do have a COVID positive response? And the first thing, and I will tell you this just as a hint, the first thing it needs to say, not the second thing, not the third thing, not the fourth thing, not the fifth thing, the first thing it needs to say is call public health. You need to call the public health department that instant, because they need to come to your park and they need to put a stop to it as fast as possible, and they will give you clear direction. But I will just tell you this just from experience and from what we've already seen other companies, which is they're going to find out everywhere they've been, everyone they've touched, everyone they've interacted with. That's the reason why they've asked people to work remotely, because if you get a COVID positive, everybody potentially is infected. So that's the reason why they've tried to say, try to scatter people out. So when you guys are writing your schedules, when you have employees there, make it that there's not more than 2 people in the office at any one time. Make sure that if employees do not have to interact, make sure they don't. Rely on walkie-talkies, use cell phones, texting. I know a lot of parks don't have cell phone coverage. Use the walkie-talkies. Now is the time to use them. Keep employees away from each other as much as possible. No parties, no conference rooms. The conference room is closed. The meeting room's closed. Nobody goes in any of those rooms. Keep employees scattered. If you keep them scattered throughout the park and have meetings all over the walkie-talkies and things, that's going to make it so that you have a much less chance of not only having one employee become COVID positive, but multiple employees becoming COVID positive. But again, don't just do this off the top of your head. Please write a plan. Please have a plan in place. This isn't something because there's a lot of things to think about. That's just one element of it. So.
And we're getting a lot of questions, Patrick, about templates for the plan and for various policies. Will we be able to either access those through the app that you mentioned, or can we get those and link them from our blog so people have access to them?
I'll tell you what, first of all, in the app, you can actually customize a plan for your park that will cover a lot of these things. And in fact, I'll talk to Brian afterwards too, because I think a lot of things that he mentioned, I will talk with him about perhaps implementing that a little bit in the app too, because he said a lot of great things. In the app, you'll be able to talk about things like human resources, health and safety, supplies. It'll ask you, where do you have supplies? Where do you want to keep them? What is your policy on this? And we give you a few choices, things that we know generally parks will choose. And you can also customize it if you want to. If you don't like any of the answers, but we make it so that you go in, multiple choice, in, out. You can create each part of your plan. Each part of the plan takes about 2 minutes at the most. So each part is pretty fast. You can have your whole plan done in 15 minutes, just like that. But I will tell you what, if there's enough interest, what I'll do is I will also create some written elements of the template too, so that because there are a few things, like there's a flyer that you can put up that says, you know, in the park, due to COVID-19, we're doing the following things. And we can just kind of lay that all out for you. And I'm happy to put a few of those on there. And of course, David, I'm happy to provide it to you and to ARVC to put up on the site if there is enough interest. We're happy to do that in addition to the app. It'll augment things that you'll find in the app, especially for people that may not have access to a smartphone, which I do find sometimes in parks, people don't have phones.
Okay.
So.
One of the, just so
Sure,
you know, one of
happy
the specific requests was to provide the written policy for sending staff home, and there were a lot of likes on that particular request. So that would be something that we'd want to post. The next question I'm going to pose to Brian and Mark. It is, we are in a small community, and currently there are not any cases of the virus in the area or close surrounding areas. Most of our customers come from areas that have the higher amount of cases. What sort of bullet points should we use to combat a negative perception or fear from our local community that we may be bringing the virus into the area?
Mark, I'll let you take that first.
Okay, thank you, Brian. So that goes into a big, this is Mark Koep, by the way. That goes into a bigger question of who your consumers are and what your consumers are thinking. Let's be straight up. People are freaked out right now, completely freaked out. So the answer to that is there's nothing you can do to prevent that public perception. The only thing you can do is communicate what you're doing, what steps you're taking to prevent the spread of the disease, and any sort of, you know, to Patrick's point, any sort of action plans you have in place to prevent that. In fact, there's some really good articles right now about some ski resort towns and some island towns like Catalina out in California, which is an island, discussing how the community members there are, you know, talking about shutting the border, not allowing anybody into those areas because they're safe for now, and not allowing people who potentially have the virus in. So the answer is you can't really reassure people in a time of fear. The only thing you can do is communicate what you're doing in a calm and honest manner, the steps you're taking, and what you would do if something happens. But also recognize, this goes to kind of Brian's really good points earlier, that if somebody does come to your park and does have the disease and it does spread in your community, you're not going to be in business for very long. So you do need to be aware, and we haven't hit on it, and I think Patrick did a little bit. We're in a national state of emergency. This isn't a joke. This isn't something that we can just pass off and say, let's do some marketing, let's keep things going. Recognize that nationwide things are shutting down. People are going through stress. So all you can do as a business owner is keep operating, keep plugging along, and take the steps that you can take to make sure that your guests in the community at large are safe. And the only thing you really can do in all of this is communicate, communicate, communicate.
I don't think I can answer any better than that, David. That's a pretty good answer. Just, you know, again, over communicate, share what you're doing, and that's going to calm a little bit of the fear, but it's never going to really go away.
We had another question that was similar, saying we've had a few comments indicating we're not being socially responsible for staying open, and we're inviting the virus into our backyard, and they're trying to figure out how to properly respond to those types of comments. I would say the answer to that question would be what you just said. Is there anything else you'd like to add, though?
I mean, there's always going to be people who have a different opinion. So yeah, really, you're just going to have to come up with, again, like we talked about, having a prepared response for different review responses or questions that come up, both for your employees as well as answering reviews and comments on social media. Just this is what we're doing. This is why we feel it's safe, because the sites are so far apart, because we're limiting groups, because we're cleaning extra. And that's really your defense. Just be polite and be professional and justify your reasoning, and then, but also be willing to adapt, right? I mean, your opinion today might change tomorrow. So.
Okay, great. I'm looking through the questions here. We have one in regards to marketing suggestions for parks that are not open yet. We're in Maine, don't open till May 15th. I've been informing our guests and all those on our mailing list and Facebook that we are planning to be open as normal and informing them of all the added cleaning and online check-in things we are doing, and that we will update if anything changes. Any other suggestions for those of us who have 2 months left to open?
No, I think you're doing basically everything you should be doing. I mean, it's 2 months out. Things are changing every hour, it seems like lately. It's hard to believe that this is like 2 weeks old. Feels like I've been dealing with it for 2 years. But yeah, I think you're doing just, over communicate and do what you're doing. And who knows, hopefully it's all behind us May 15th, but definitely don't overreact. But I would also, like talking about, continue to have your policies in place and think about the what if it is still there, or what if this changes, and just be prepared for that as we get closer to May 15th.
Yeah, and I'll echo on Brian. Yeah, have plans in place with probabilities of results. So for example, we've got client parks that are opening, their scheduled opening is April 17th that weekend, right? And so what the messaging we're putting out right now is that they currently plan to open on April 17th, but they will communicate. In fact, we've set a date of April 1st, we'll communicate where we're going to be at. So 2 weeks out, we're going to start dictating whether or not we're going to be opening on those dates or not. And but what you then need to do if you're making those decisions is have a very definitive plan in place. What are you going to do if you cancel opening weekend? What happens to those reservations? Do you credit them? Do you refund them? If you refund them, are you keeping a $10 cancellation fee? How are you going to handle that process? I did see some questions in regard to the cancellation fees. Recognize that we are currently in a state of disaster. If you start holding $10 away from people, that negative publicity from that will hurt you long term. I would advise you go full refund. I know that that's going to hurt a lot. What I would advise you then to do is start tracking your losses, because eventually we should see some FEMA money roll into this, and you can start applying for credits based upon those losses. But you're going to need to, and obviously that's a suggestion. We don't know that that's going to happen yet. But should that happen, you're going to need to be able to document your losses and the impact of this virus on your business. So communicating is key, but also having a plan in place to address everything that's going to potentially happen. And then also recognize there are a large number of RVers out there that are full-time RVers that are going to, the word I'm using is going to ground. They're looking for a place to go to stay right now. There's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear. In fact, Mike Wendland from RV Lifestyle, he just did a post this morning basically saying that to his followers, and he has about 1 million followers that follow him. And he basically said, hey, folks, I'm looking at shutdowns happening. You all need to find a place that's safe to stay. And so start expecting, if you're a transient park, it may be a good time to consider bringing in some short-term, longer-term guests that are full-time RVers to stay during this crisis to keep your income coming in. Just make sure you're covering your bases and you're not going broke through this crisis.
This is a question that could probably be answered by all three of you. Should campgrounds be limiting where in the country or the world reservations are coming from? Should they restrict that?
I don't think so, because again, I mean, there's a lot of legal underlying tones there that I can't speak to, but I don't think so, because it's everywhere.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And the only thing you can really prevent against or look for, and there's actually another question in there. Somebody's asking, can you ask them about their current health and check their temperature? What I would recommend, and this is a good point, and I think maybe even Jeff Sims should, may chime in at some point on this too. We're starting to see some private campgrounds shut down. This happened in Utah in the Moab area. The local health director shut down all non-essential businesses, and he included campgrounds and RV parks in there. One of the things that I'm recommending is that you start reaching out to both your local and state representatives and also your local health department, and start discussing the idea of being an essential business, because the reality is you are providing emergency housing to folks. I'm not giving you a legal opinion on that, but we're starting to see a little bit of those trends, a little bit of an overreaction. So think about that whenever you're making a policy or decision. And this kind of goes to that previous question about the community is afraid that we're going to bring people that are sick into it. Think about how you're engaging with your local community overall. You want to avoid them thinking that you're going to be a source of the illness or a potential location of spreading, and what steps you're taking to mitigate that, but also recognize that in a time of crisis, your parks can serve as nexuses for emergency services. So you could be a home base for traveling nurses. You could be an evacuation center. You could, if you have propane fill, you're a source of needed gas for recovery efforts. So keep those in your back pockets and be aware that the decisions and comments you're making now will impact the decisions and actions of legislatures and health departments when they make their choices in the future.
And
I agree with that. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
As well, that ARVC is and has been actively advocating in Washington at the national level for that term exactly of essential business, for campgrounds to be classified that way because of many of those reasons that Mark just mentioned. But as Mark said, it's also important at the local level for you individually to advocate for your own campground as well. The LP is a big one. The propane access, we're seeing a lot of parks in California being able to stay open despite local decisions because they offer the propane. So that's a big one. And as long as, again, I want to hit on the word safe. That's the biggest piece, going all the way back to Patrick's presentation, that all of this is moot unless you are able to remain a safe place for people. So that's the big key word. The next,
David, yeah, in regard to that safe, because it's been brought up a few times, one of the things that we're seeing a lot of owners talk about, and overall some of the industry leaders is not using safe in any sort of marketing unless you can absolutely guarantee it. And the reality is you can't guarantee it. So use caution if you're doing any marketing or communications or even social media posts saying that you're safe. Unless you can absolutely guarantee that you're safe, don't get yourself into that legal bind where you said you're safe and then you're not.
Yes, I would agree. Just to clarify my statement, I would also agree not to. ARVC is not recommending that the word safe be used in marketing, but to make sure that you're able to create a safe environment according to the CDC guidelines. That's the rule of law that should be followed. We had another question come in. Do you recommend adjusting office hours to limit the amount of traffic in the office, or how to adjust office interaction, whether it be between employees or employees and guests? You guys have any ideas on that?
Yes, Mark.
Yes,
I'd recommend
the answer
kind of
is
what Patrick said about that question in regard to somebody getting sick. Ask yourself this question: if a guest comes into your office, gets you sick, and you get your wife sick, and you get your employees sick, can anybody operate your business? If the answer to that question is no, then your office should be closed, and you should be taking steps to do self-check-ins, utilize your reservation systems, utilize email or text messaging, and get as far hands-off as possible. We need to take this seriously at that level because the authorities are taking it seriously. So, consider what would happen if somebody gets sick in your office. What happens to your business? So I would advise that you take serious steps to mitigate as much interaction as possible, keep those safe distances, the 6 feet, and also keep watching the news in regard to how long that the virus reportedly can linger on surfaces or in airspace. That's significant, and you're dealing with a lot of folks, especially the Canadians racing back north, and you're going to start getting a lot of travelers over the next 2 days here. So use caution, don't get sick.
Well, and I agree with that. And in fact, I actually want to take it a step farther too, because one of the things that we have advised offices to do is you need to say a few things. You need to put a note on your door, like you need to put a note on the office door, which says, if you have a phone, you need to call us first. So call us is the primary way to communicate with us, and provide the phone number there. Then second, you need to either stagger schedules where you say, okay, we're not open from this period of time to this period of time, so that you actually limit the number of office hours that you are open. Or what you need to do is you need to say, and some parks say, I have to have some interpersonal interaction, that's fine. Then you should only have one employee in the office who is interacting with someone coming in. And what you should do is you should say, we limit the number of people who can physically be in the office at any one time. We actually limit that. And some parks we actually say you should limit it to, 2 or 3 people at once. That sounds very strange, but really it needs to be that low, especially in areas where an outbreak has already occurred. You need to do this also in places where you have people of heightened vulnerability. And you should emphasize that in what you put on your door, so that you say, if you are a person who is vulnerable, please shelter in place. Don't come into the office unless you absolutely have to. Other than that, we would prefer all interaction to be done over the phone. And then have people manning the phones. And again, you can have those in the back offices. You can put it so that employees are appropriately sequestered, because otherwise you just have too many people in the office, and that's a bad look. On top of the fact that the CDC has specifically said, you shouldn't have that many folks in the room at any one time. So that's a way that is a policy and managerial control. And the last thing is, oddly enough, is make sure that either you're locking the front door, which a lot of people do, and they say, we will physically be letting people in one at a time, so we'll unlock it, step back, you come in, we do our interaction, you leave, and then we lock it again. And some are doing that because they have employees who are vulnerable as well. So those are a few of the things, because I agree with what Mark was saying too, which is it's a perception issue. It's something where, you have to make sure that people are seeing that you're being safe and that you're acting appropriately in response to the threat.
Patrick, would you, in a situation like that, would you recommend a spot cleaning in between each of those guest visits into the office?
Yes, absolutely. You should wipe down every surface and remove all the chairs from the lobby. All the chairs are removed and put them in the back so that nobody can sit down. They have to come in and they have to actually walk into the office. And then after the interaction, the countertop should be wiped down. Any pens that they used should be wiped down. Anything they touched, you need to be like a detective. You need to be like a CSI professional. Anywhere that they touched, you need to wipe it down. And again, make it very visible so that people looking into the office from the outside saw that that's what you did, because that will help prevent the panic, because otherwise people are going to ask you. As a matter of fact, when I was in the store the other day, somebody was trying to hand me a pen. I go, who's touched that last? Do you disinfect the pen? They were like, oh, I forgot about that. And I said, well, I'll use my own pen from now on. And so, those are the kinds of things that are little but can make a big difference, especially if people see that that's what you are doing as well. So think about the little things. Machines people have touched, the ATM machine, whatever it is, the credit card machines. These are all things that come into play.
So limit the number of things that can be touched and then clean anything that has been touched.
Correct.
Is the lesson there. What about moving outside? We've had some questions about outdoor spaces. Should we ask customers not to go sightseeing? Is it legal to allow only 2 people per site? Those kinds of things. That's going to depend. Well, the latter question is a local laws question, and those are questions that can be answered by public health. Going outside is fine, and the CDC has been absolutely clear with people. Absolutely. In fact, this actually came up in regards to people who, obviously because gyms are closed, they tell people work out outside. It's a great day. Just maintain the social distance between everybody else. But there's no reason why people can't go on a forest hike. They can't go on the trails. They can't go out. Just make sure that people understand, please don't congregate together. Please don't congregate into areas. Please don't congregate around, like little campfire areas. All that stuff has to be closed because you just don't want people getting close. But going outside is perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. Okay, here's another one. If an employee takes, let's see, hold on just a second. If an employee takes a risk like visiting someone at a hospital or travels on a plane, how do you protect other employees? Do you just tell that person you've participated in a high-risk activity, don't come to work? You need to lay out in your, as I was telling you guys earlier, you need to lay out a very specific policy as to when you would send people home and when you would not allow people on site. There are types of businesses where, like, for example, in healthcare, where they say, if you've done a high-risk activity, you need to make sure that they will ask you a series of questions. Were you wearing those clothes? Have you showered since then? Things like that. They're allowed to ask those questions.
But in some cases, I think it goes a little extreme because, for example, I flew on a plane yesterday, and when I came back to California, and by the way, I was at the Philadelphia airport at 7 o'clock in the morning. There was nobody there. The airport was completely empty. I've never seen anything like that. In fact, when I was walking through security, there was like 7 security guys, and I was the only one going through. And because one of the things that people are afraid of is congregating into these areas. And so, but when I came home, first thing I did was I took off all my clothes and I put it in the laundry, because you don't want any of the clothes that you are wearing being entered into your home. So one of the things that we ask people is we say, don't make it up off the top of your head. Whatever the policy is, you need to tell people. But my suggestion to you is, instead of asking people, where were you, this and that, look at the physiologic symptoms that you're seeing in people. That doesn't require a physician. If people are coughing, if people are sneezing, if people clearly are feverish, if people clearly look ill, send them home. Don't ask questions, just send them home. That is a better way of doing it than simply asking, okay, were you at an airport? Were you doing a high risk activity? Those are the kinds of things. But for me, and the way that I think it's most fair to employees, because otherwise it gets very arbitrary. When were you on the plane? How are you on the plane? All that. Are they experiencing symptoms? Because if they are, then they need to go home. Of course, the obvious exception is if somebody was just in China or Iran or Europe, right? So if they were coming back, then clearly that's obviously different. If they were in those places, the CDC says you need to be quarantined, or public health says you need to be quarantined for 14 days, then of course they cannot come to work. And that needs to be in your policy too. So make sure you specifically, again, write it down so that nobody can later claim that you are being arbitrary or you were singling anyone out because you didn't like them or whatever, which does happen. So make sure that you're really, really clear on that. So.
Okay, one other question getting back to outside that I missed was in regards to lakes and ponds. I'm assuming that the answer, based on what we've heard already, is going to be social distancing rather than cleanliness in those cases. Would you agree with that, Patrick?
Unequivocally, yes. Yeah, I mean, obviously for right now, one of the things that we tell people is that for now, not saying it has to go on for weeks and months, but for now, really don't allow people to congregate into those areas. So common areas where things like where there are campfires, where there are places where people go, if there's obviously like a boat launch area, close it. Is going on a boat fine? I'm sure it's fine. And really the CDC doesn't have any specific guidance on that except saying, maintain distance. But the problem is that you could potentially have a situation where you have 10, 12, 15 people all congregating in an area. None of them are interacting necessarily with each other, but they're preparing to launch, they're on the dock site, they're pulling line, they're doing whatever. So those are things where we say for now, and this may change. So for those of you who come on the Q&A later, I will give you updated guidance on what we're hearing. So if anything like that changes, but for right now, we recommend that people not do it again for social distancing reasons, as you were just talking about, David. So yes, correct.
Is there a guideline for how often parks should have environmental cleaning done?
No. No.
Nothing from the CDC?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. Not for this kind of park. For hotels, yes. So if you run, like for example, I work with an RV park up in Yosemite. They actually have a hostel and they have like what would be equivalent of like a B&B. We told them, yes, there's no environmental cleaning in response to that. But in regards to hostel and the B&B, there is very clear guidance on that. There is clear guidance on when you need to do that kind of cleaning. But again, that may change.
Yep. Paid visitors getting guests from the outside. What would you guys think about that?
Paid visitors.
So I'm sorry, campers getting guests from the outside to coming in and visiting them at their site. Limit that.
For me, this is Patrick. The recommendation, I'm just going to be real quick, Mark, and I'll let you go, is my answer right now is actually no. My answer is no. The government has asked people to shelter in place. Again, this doesn't have anything to do with that they were concerned about sheltering in place. So unless it is like an end of life kind of issue, in which case they really shouldn't be at the park. it really right now, just from an emergency and disaster professional perspective, as I said, everyone's perspective is a little bit different. You guys have a lot of experience, but for right now, if you really look at it, they're asking people not to. But Mark, you may have a different perspective than mine. So
yeah, I would say that it depends on the area you're in. So there are some areas that have the shelter-in-place orders, but a lot of parks are out in rural areas. So we got to recognize the audience too. Campers are fiercely independent. If you all of a sudden become the cop at the gate, stopping people from coming in, as long as if you're charging guest fees or whatever, it's a different conversation. But basically, my recommendation on this is be aware of your local laws, your local local rules on it, but also be aware of your customers and your guests. Some folks have long-term folks in there. You've got some senior citizens, so they have people delivering groceries to them. I would just recommend communicating, being aware of the situation, and using your best judgment on it. I mean, it's hard for us to blanket say, everybody should do this, at least on this topic, unless something changes. I mean, just be ready for it. It's obviously accelerated pretty quickly over the last week. As you think about it, 1 week ago, there was nothing, and here we are today, a week later. So who knows what we're going to be at next week? So just be really flexible on it. And talking about your customers and your guests, I mean, your guests rely upon you. I mean, you're providing places of enjoyment and recreation, but in this time, you're actually providing a place of refuge for your guests, a place where they can go and feel and stay safe. So, and I know you all recognize that, right? You all run amazing businesses, and you're on here because you want to learn and provide those type of services to your clients. So I would say just be aware of your local regulations. If you're in a shelter in place, I agree with Patrick. You gotta notify your guests, but also recognize if you have a shelter in place. For example, I'm currently in Ventura County. The shelter in place applies to 75-year-old folks and older. So somebody could be required to be shelter in place, but they have their son who's delivering groceries to their patio for them. So just be flexible and be aware of what's going on.
I think, David, from my perspective, I'd agree with both of those. And the only thing I would say is, again, the oversharing and how you're phrasing things. So it's super easy to write a Facebook post that says no guests are allowed anymore to parks. But if you write it in such a way that you're empathizing with people and explaining why you're doing this for the safety of people, then it'll serve you better long term.
We had a similar question come in about in communities where the perception is that this is media hype, that it's blown out of proportion, which we've covered that it's not. But if that's the perception in the area, how do you deal from a marketing perspective? How do you deal with that perception without being rude? What would you say to that?
Just, again, be as professional and as calm and as orderly as you possibly can. I don't think that there's, regardless of what your perspective is or isn't, or what you believe or what you don't as a guest or as an owner, I think that public safety, as Patrick would probably agree with me, is number one above all else. And so you have to follow what the CDC is saying. And so I think that regardless of a review you're getting or a comment you're getting or what the tone is or feel is of the majority or the minority of your guests, that ultimately your job is to keep people safe. And so you might just have to take the hit in that case and hope people eventually change their minds. But just answer it as a professional as possible and explain why and do your best to justify it.
Yeah, and to Brian's point, you can't go wrong if you're following official guidelines. You can go wrong if you go against those official guidelines. So exactly to Brian's point, you might take a hit because you're enforcing it, but the reality is you might take a hit from one guest versus going on the flip side and getting hit by local governments.
And from my perspective, the way that I tell people is, look, if you think it's overhyped, perfectly fine. You know what I want you to treat this as? Pretend that we're in a fire drill. I want you to pretend that this is just a drill and that's it. And this is a wonderful chance for you to be prepared in case there is a quote unquote real pandemic. So just think of it as like a nationwide disaster drill. And so should you continue to evaluate things? Absolutely. But as far as I'm concerned, you should actually treat it as if it's a real thing, because I mean, nobody would ever say, to your kids at school, hey, well, why are you running fire drills? That's overhyped. That's not a real fire. Well, of course we're overhyping it. That's why it's called a fire drill, because we do that because we want to simulate the reality of it. And so when I do real disaster drills, especially when I do this at like healthcare facilities, I turn to people and I say, listen, treat this drill as if it were the real thing. Do I want to hear yelling and screaming? Absolutely, I do, because in a healthcare facility, that's how it would be like. In this case, I just tell people you don't have to overreact, but what I do ask you to do is to act as if it were real, because then you'll be better prepared in case we have a real drill. And that kind of, in my mind, kind of deflects people a lot of times. Again, everybody's a little bit different, but when you put it like that, then I think people realize, okay, at least I can start doing some preparation, because what I don't want to see happen, and I think everybody would agree with me on this, is you don't want people doing nothing. Or just saying, you know what, I'm not changing the way I live my life at all. I'm not doing anything. Unless you already have a pandemic plan in place, you really need to be thinking about how to deal with it in an effective, efficient way. This is the chance. Now's the time to do it and think it all the way through.
So one last question before we wrap things up here. And this gets to the essential business piece that we were mentioning earlier. Do you think it would hurt to offer a shelter in place area for those who own RVs and are full-timers who want to stay with us?
This is Mark. I would say absolutely yes. And this is my advice, especially to transient parks that are being hit hard right now, is that it's an absolute yes. Echoing what I said about what Mike Winland just shared with his audience. That's his advice to his audience, is find a place that you're going to stay for the next few weeks to the next few months. I would encourage you, my advice to park owners is we don't know where this is going. This could be all over in 2 weeks and everything's fine and dandy. That would be great. But this could last for the next 2 months, and then we're all in a lot of deep trouble. If it goes that alternative route, what can you do to make sure that your minimum income is met to be able to cover your mortgage payment and to feed yourself and your family? So I would recommend that if you are a transient park, if you do have the sites, start making adjustments and allowing people to come in. Also recognize you might still remain a transient park. Say you're along I-95 and you've got guests coming through that are heading up to Canada. There's a chance, we don't know how big of a chance, but there's a chance that you could get some guests in tonight, and then overnight there's an order of everybody shelter in place, you can't go anywhere, and all of a sudden those short-term guests become long-term guests. So I would recommend that, just from a marketing and business standpoint, that we need to adjust. Everything is moving really fluidly, and it's going in the wrong direction right now. It's going, more and more towards a lockdown scenario. I'm not saying nationwide lockdown, but definitely in regional areas. New York State is announcing that they've got an increase in cases. So, back to that conversation about whether or not you think the virus is serious or not, it doesn't matter. At this point, it is real. At this point, we're in a nationwide state of emergency. This is unprecedented. I was just doing the math in my head. We're talking about 5 generations of people since this has ever happened before. This is unprecedented in modern times. I mean, it's worldwide. So we really live in interesting times. And one of the good things that I've seen is that our industry has come together really well. So I'd like to say that I applaud ARVC for the efforts you're doing. And then also I'd recommend that you reach out to your local state associations and also your neighboring parks. We need to come together as a community and work together through this. We're in something real, so let's be real.
I would echo that, Mark. What Mark just said. Your state associations are a very valuable resource. ARVC is providing a lot of resources as well, but at the local level, having access to get questions answered by your state executive, for instance, is extremely valuable as well. Those contact information for the state executives are available on ARVC's website under membership and then local support. And we can add that link to our blog as well so that you have it. In the interest of time on this particular call, I'm gonna stop us here, and I want to close out by reminding everyone that we will be back on this same channel on Monday and again on Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern, both days. And that schedule will continue every week for the next month. And we'll reevaluate if we need to go beyond that, we will. We're doing this in part because things are changing so quickly and we want to keep everyone as up to date as possible. We will have on Monday, we will have our panelists from today as well as experts in the insurance field, banking and finance, and advocacy, and we're working on getting a legal expert as well. Some of the questions that came in today didn't get answered because they fell into one of those categories, but we will either get them answered on Monday or we will try to get them answered between now and Monday and posted up on our blog. For those of you who joined late, there were some questions that came in late that had been answered at the beginning of the webinar. So I would urge you to go on to our blog where the recording of this webinar will be posted, and all other webinars, and you can get the answers to your questions that way as well. I hope everyone can join us on Monday at 11, but again, if you can't, the sessions will be recorded, and we will also be posting templates for you on the blog, as well as the link to Patrick's app that we'll be launching that will help you create the emergency preparedness plan that you need. And we'll also be linking out to Brian's link, Insider Perks link, to help with reputation management and social monitoring for your park. And that concludes our webinar for today. I want to thank again our panelists, and thank you all for joining. Wherever you are in the country, be safe and be well. Thank you.